I'll never get back to where I was before my surgery, so why should I even try? I think as a 5, knowing how it felt for 17 years, and then now like I actually physically cannot do it, that's really hard to even try.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. We are smack dab in the middle of our series in Season 3, Trauma, Spaces, Places, and Aces. We decided to open the season with one of my favorite aces, which is the Enneagram. So today we bring to the mic Type 5, Sophia Walsh, to the episode to talk about her journey with thyroid cancer. I do want to point out, as I often have on every episode, that I do realize that the Enneagram is not the end-all. But when we take a gospel-centered approach to understanding how God made us, then we can, in fact, process trauma. Today's episode is going to be an excellent, excellent representation of that. Before we get there, though, the Wednesdays with Watson podcast has suddenly, blessedly, become a listener-supported, donor-supported podcast. We are currently running a fundraiser for not only the podcast, but also to provide money for Baylight counseling, for pro bono counseling, so that people who cannot afford counseling would be able to afford it based on donations from the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. That is a fundraiser we have running on Facebook. I will provide that link in the show notes and would be so grateful if you are so inclined to donate anything that you may feel like might help us continue through our mission here and helping people. As I've mentioned so many times, I will never stop fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode as we step into the Enneagram 5 and as we move forward through the rest of the season, moving into after the aces, the spaces, and the places, and more on that. So stay tuned. So now let's drop into this conversation with Enneagram Type 5, Sophia Walsh. Okay, guys, we are here in our 5th week of our deep dive into the Enneagram and how it can help us process trauma. I'm so excited to bring back my co-host, Crissy Lothridge. Say hey to the people, Crissy Lothridge.
Hey, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Hey to the people. And so today, guys, we have a very special guest. I had to scour high and low, and coming from the middle of the country by really her mom said, hey, my daughter might be interested in this, an Enneagram 5. And so I would love to welcome Sophia Walsh to the podcast. Sophia, welcome to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
This is the 4th or 5th time we've tried to do this. So I'm so excited. So let's just jump right into this. As you know, we are talking about the Enneagram and how it can help us process trauma. And so we curated questions, and this first question is one of Chrissy's favorite questions to ask. And so since it's yours, guess I'm going to let you ask it.
I love asking this question. I really do, because I'm learning so much about each personality type and each person. Can you tell me your favorite thing about how God made you?
You know, it's funny that this is your favorite question, because I was thinking about this for so long. I was like, what is it? And I think for me, I'm very hypercritical of myself. When I was thinking about this question, I was just seeing like all the things I didn't like. But then I realized that I think that hypercriticalness and that honesty that I can bring is just so important to having real connections with people and real relationships. And so, yeah, as I've gotten older, especially, I just love my honesty, and I love that I feel convicted about things, because I think it would be so boring if I didn't feel convicted about anything, if I just let life pass me by.
I love that. I really do. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Especially, listeners, you can't see what we're seeing. You have to excuse my voice. I'm struggling with my voice. But Sophia is in her 20s, y'all. And that was not a 20-year-old answer for sure. And so, no, I do love that, because I think that when we recognize that about ourselves, then we can truly step in to who God made us, right? Speaking of that, so the Enneagram 5, and we say this on every episode, we do not believe that the Enneagram is the end-all, but we do believe that with a gospel-centered approach, that we can use it to help us. And Sophia, I was very excited when you agreed to come onto the podcast, because I know the story that we're going to tell here today. And I know how difficult it is for your Enneagram type, the 5, to do something like you're doing. Like by definition, Enneagram 5s don't do this. So I'd like to read the core fear of the Enneagram 5 first. And so the core fear, as Crissy Harrison describes it on that episode in season 2, is the fear of being invaded, having obligations placed upon them, or thought of as being ignorant. As we move into your story, and we can kind of mesh this with your story, you were diagnosed with thyroid cancer. When we pair the diagnosis of thyroid cancer with that core fear of being invaded or having an obligation put on you, more than that, being ignorant, how did that resonate with you? Because, I just would love to know, after having been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, how did this core fear resonate with you?
Yeah. I wish that I had known about the Enneagram when I was diagnosed. That would have been a very, very beneficial tool for me. But I think, Amy, I had told you this before when we were kind of going back and forth. The first thing I did when I was diagnosed was research. I looked up videos. I looked up the worst possible outcomes. And my mom's a 6. And so she's like, well, what are you doing? She's like, don't do that. And I was like, no, I have to. That's what was making me feel better. And so I'll kind of go off into 2 parts here. First of all, I did not want any doctor to tell me something that I didn't already know. So I got hit with this diagnosis of no idea what this was. And of course she used papillary thyroid carcinoma, like the medical jargon. And I was like, huh? Like I had no idea what it was. And so after that, I was like, yeah, I don't want doctors to tell me what I don't know. So I had to learn everything. And now I'm like, I know way too much about the thyroid. And I don't even have one anymore. I know way too much about it. And then in addition to that, all of a sudden, as a cancer survivor, there were a lot of people who were then looking to me to be this kind of example. And so that obligations piece that you had talked about, my parents own their own business and they mostly work with kids 8 to 19. And so there were a lot of young kids who were watching my journey and a lot of parents who were watching my journey. And I always joke that I had to get used to people knowing who I was, who I didn't know, because my parents own the business. But then on top of that, there were people who were like, I was watching your story. I talked with your mom about it and all this stuff. And you're such an inspiration. And I think that's a very common theme with cancer survivors, but also as a 5, I was like, I didn't ask for that. Like, I didn't ask for these kids to be looking up to me. So that was really hard to process, was kind of coming to terms with the fact that just existing was an inspiration to people. I was like, I don't get why. And also allowing myself then to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is hard in and of itself, but also as a 5, I don't want people to see that side of me and to be weak. And so when I did have those bad days, it was like, I can't show that because there's all these people watching me and I'm an inspiration now. So yeah, those are kind of the 2 things that I kind of get from that.
That's a big burden. And especially for a 5, I can imagine it was life sucking. And yet you feel like as a Christian too, that it's your job to be a good steward of the pain. And so then it's even more of a burden because are you letting God down? And so it's just burden on burden on burden. And that's not from the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
but you feel it. I feel it with you,
Yeah. And Crissy, as a thyroid cancer survivor at a very similar age, did you feel a little bit of that too? Because Crissy's a 6, like you mentioned, but I think she wings a little into the 5. Did you feel that too, Crissy? Like you had this great big responsibility to be the walking, talking, hey, God healed me story?
I felt like I was okay. So because I'm a 6, I was good. Everything was good for like 6 months after everything. And then I absolutely crashed. And I was like, but it's over. It's in the past. And I fell to pieces because all of a sudden it all hit me what I had been through and I could have died. And oh my gosh, life isn't safe anymore. And I had a really hard time, but it was like a huge delayed reaction for me. And I started having anxiety and panic attacks and all those types of things. That was my experience. Did you have any of that?
Yes. Yeah. I was also kind of in that burden. I was like, got to put on, the face, got to put on everything's fine. It's fine. And it also got to the point where I was like, I don't want people to ask me. I don't want to have to say I'm okay, I'm not okay. And so it was just like, yep, don't want to talk about it. So yeah, I had a very similar experience. I did radiation about 6 months after my surgery. I was like, oh, I'm doing good. And then radiation, and then it all came back around. But yeah, for about how long? A year and a half after my diagnosis, I had panic attacks. So I was diagnosed when I was 17. I was a senior in high school. And so my freshman year of college, I had a panic attack probably every day, every other day. And I did not get a diagnosis of panic disorder. I did not get a diagnosis of PTSD, of anxiety, until the middle of my freshman year. And so I was so clueless because I was like, why is all this stuff happening to me? Exactly like you said, it's in the past. It's been a year already. Why am I still dealing with this? And it's funny because just a week ago was my 3-year anniversary of my surgery, was the 25th of September. And again, all of those feelings, I'm like, it's been 3 years. Why am I not okay? And it's like, the 25th of September is always going to be a day, right? It's always going to be one of those days where I sit and I watch TV, and that's it. But yeah, I definitely relate to that kind of delayed aspect of pushing it off, and then bam, you can't push it off any longer.
Yeah, as I've said so many times on this podcast, if we don't pay attention to trauma, it will pay attention to us, right? And so, Sophia, I remember getting a DM from your mom who said, Sophia just got diagnosed with medical PTSD. Is that a thing? She said to me on this DM. And I'm like, I was shocked that you had not, because trauma by definition is your safety being compromised, life-threatening illnesses, witnessing those kinds of things. And so even I could have diagnosed you with PTSD. And so it was frustrating to me when I got that DM from her. I'm wondering, as a 5, for those other 5s out there, because you just said the same thing, like you did all the research and then you're moving on with your life and you're having panic attacks. And for those of you out there who have never had a panic attack, congratulations.
Yeah.
I do not wish that on my worst enemy. It feels like you're going to die. And so let's talk about when they finally diagnosed you with medical PTSD and they explain to you, this is why you feel like you're going to die. This is why you feel like your heart's being ripped out of your chest. And by the way, not having a thyroid, and Crissy can speak to this for a minute, not having a thyroid doesn't help with the anxiety. Neither one of you have thyroids. They took them out. And so you're constantly on medication that's jacking you up and jacking you down and things, and you've been through trauma. And so, Sophia, I'm wondering if for the other Enneagram 5s out there, because I'm sure you beat yourself up about that when they were like, hey, you have medical PTSD. And you're like, well, I'm not going to tell you what you're like. You tell me. How did that resonate with you, like with the Enneagram 5, the research and those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. It took me getting hospitalized for my mental health to get a diagnosis. And so, well, my hospitalization story is not great just because I feel like I didn't want to be there. It was one of those moments where, and I think this is definitely a 5 thing, I was a little bit vulnerable and then it came back to bite me. And I was like, I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. And then I was completely re-traumatized because I was trapped in a hospital. I have medical PTSD. And this woman looks at me. I think she wasn't even my main psychiatrist in the psych ward. She was the assistant. And she was like, it sounds like you have medical PTSD. She's like, do you have nightmares? I'm like, yeah. Do you have this? And I'm checking off all the boxes. She's like, okay, yeah, you definitely have PTSD. And I was like, biggest facepalm ever. So first was frustration because I was like, I don't want to be here. I should have known this. And duh, like it was very clear. Like you just said, I experienced this huge trauma, but also just the relief of like knowing there was a reason, I think as a 5, because panic and anxiety are so illogical. You can never make sense of it because when you're having a panic attack, you feel like you're going to die. You feel like you're going to die when are completely safe.
Yeah, and all rational thoughts just seem to go out the window. Our running joke is I had a plan for if we were going along the road, and it's a long story, but it was an area that had a tunnel with high walls, and my plan and my panic was to pull the car over and scale the wall. That doesn't make any sense, right? We can all laugh about how stupid that is, but it was my plan of action because in panic, you are desperate for something to make it stop. Yeah. And when you have that repeatedly, I also have panic attacks repeatedly. It wears on you. It's bad enough one time, but when it's repeated and repeated and you're constantly in that place of just trying to make it stop, a diagnosis is actually a relief. And I so feel that because finally you're like, okay, well, that makes sense. Let's move forward from here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to speak into both of your lives right now, whether you're an Enneagram 5, 6 or nothing. Both of you have been through hell when it comes from this perspective. And to then have to live with panic attacks because your thyroid gland literally can. So let's pretend, Sophia, that you walked out of it without medical PTSD. Not having a thyroid in and of itself, chemically and all the things, is going to continue to give you panic attacks. And so it makes my heart hurt to hear that. But it does also remind me of a question I wanted to ask you. And I don't know if I can do this without crying on this day, but this whole thing also threatened to take something very special from you because you received some wounding messages from people who didn't think, right? It doesn't matter whether you're an Enneagram 5, you're a precious daughter of the Most High King who had just been through hell and back. You went back to school, and then what happened?
Well, my freshman year, I decided not to pursue theater. I'm a theater kid, but I decided not to pursue theater. And it wasn't because of the cancer. It was just, that wasn't what my interest was, but I wanted to still have it as a hobby. And I had a voice teacher, which actually kind of kickstarted my re-traumatization. She told me that she thought my vocal cords were permanently damaged. And she suggested me going to get scoped, which is something that is very normal as a singer. However, for someone with medical PTSD, what she was telling me was, there's something real wrong in there. You have to go get a camera shoved down your throat and figure it out. And that was really the kickstart of everything. And to be quite honest with you, I haven't felt normal about my voice since then. I did one show since then, but I don't really sing anymore because it just, first of all, it hurts like physically, but second of all, it brings back all of those thoughts of like, am I not good enough? And I'll never get back to where I was before my surgery, so why should I even try? That's a big thought that comes with it. And I think as a 5, knowing how it felt for 17 years to sing a certain way, and then now like I actually physically cannot do it, that's really hard to even try. And so sometimes my mom will be like, just sing, you'll feel better like with your anxiety, which I think is true to an extent. But on the other hand, I'm like, nah, like I don't even want to try anymore.
It breaks my heart because to me, your voice still sounds amazing. In preparation for this interview, I went back on your mom's Instagram and listened to the before and the after. And I hope that one day, first of all, I hope that it stops physically hurting you to sing. But this is the thing, guys, about trauma. And this is the thing about people, particularly of Enneagram 5, who, as Carissa explained in the episode, she said, Enneagram 5s wake up having had a great night's sleep. And the majority of us would be like, hey, I'm going off to rule the world. Whereas Enneagram 5s say, you know what, I'm going to keep my energy level down to about 30%. And so what I hear in a healing, ing, Sophia Walsh, is a journey to that. And I just want to speak that life into you, because if the Lord told the story where it would stop hurting and brought the desire back, the talent is so there. And this is your trauma speaking, and this is your Enneagram 5-ness. Like, you know what? I don't really have the energy to do all the work it's going to take to get back. Does that resonate with you when it comes to singing?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, like I don't have, like I need to keep that energy pushed down.
Give yourself grace. No, it's so hard. It's so hard. And I feel so much of this. I assume I must wing 5 because I am like, oh, wow. I feel so much of this from even my story. And yeah.
Okay, let's go there for a second. So Crissy's, as a result of her thyroid cancer, we believe led to many years down the road, severe infertility, taking away your ability to have children. And Crissy, we can cut that if you don't want me to share that, but is that what you mean?
It's a lot, because I think it also led to some autoimmune issues. And so now the thing I don't want to try is, I used to play sports all the time, but I don't have the energy, so I'm not even going to try. So I used to be super athletic and I love to exercise, and now you can't find me in a gym. And it's one of my favorite things, playing sports. I just don't. But it's part of that. Like, I want to say to you what I want to say to me. We're not done yet. Let's keep fighting. I really believe the Lord is healing in our stories each day, and he can tell a new story. And I've found new passions that aren't sports. So it may be that there's a different path, but I hope someday to say, dude, I'm back at the gym and I'm loving it. And I hope that you get to say the same thing about theater. But if the Lord tells a different story, that's a good story too. But there will be healing, and he will lead you down a path. But don't give up. I see the fighter in you. You're doing an amazing job, and give yourself grace. Lots of grace. You're doing amazingly. This is a tough road.
Can you say the grace thing my favorite way that you say it, please?
Grace upon grace upon grace.
Grace.
For you.
Yeah. Grace upon grace upon grace for you, because I know that it can be a little tunnel vision. You're only 3 years out, right? But that's 3 years out from diagnosis. That's not 3 years out from the clean bill of health.
Right.
Yeah. And so give yourself time. I pray that the Lord does bring the desire back and takes the pain away. But for Enneagram 5s out there who are experiencing trauma, I think Crissy and Sophia just said it beautifully. Listen, we don't want to fight because we only have so many spoons. You hear this analogy a lot, the spoon analogy. You walk around with 10 spoons and you decide who you're going to give those spoons to. Well, Enneagram 2s, like me, we just wake up and give all 10 of them to whoever we see first. and then Enneagram 5s, you guys probably still have your spoons from, the day you were born. And so I do hope, Sophia, that, and it's my prayer that whatever the story that the Lord tells, you being on this podcast is a good steward of the pain. And so what I want to ask you too, though, I think that because, that was heavy. And as you experience trauma as an Enneagram 5, and like you said, the indicting yourself, I should have known, of course I have medical PTSD. No, you shouldn't have, sweetie. No, you shouldn't have. There's no amount of Googling or any of those things that could have told you what you didn't know. No one hates the blind side more than I do. And I have 0 Enneagram 5 in me. But both of you, Crissy, since you wing so heavily into 5, because you definitely don't wing into 7. I love you, but you don't. There are some beautiful ways that Enneagram 5s show up in the world. And I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Sophia. How are some beautiful ways that you feel like your Enneagram 5-ness show up in the world and help those of us who give away all of our spoons?
That's a good question. I actually have never met another 5. I've never met another 5. And so I'm just second guessing myself now, because I know an 8, and she thought she was a 5, but she's definitely an 8. I oftentimes have felt another way that the Enneagram has helped me is just feeling not alone. And so I feel like definitely as a 5, there's this comfortability in isolation, but also I feel like when I allow myself to step out and look at things objectively and take things from a different point of view, I love I want to be a teacher. And so I love when I can see something click, even if it's not somebody that I'm teaching, even if it's my boyfriend is having trouble with something. I'm like, well, think of it this way. And he's like, oh, that makes so much sense. Or when he asks me a random trivia question and I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. Like, I just think it's so fun to teach and to learn and to have that aspect. But also I think as a 5 and being so objective, I relate to a lot of people and a lot of people can relate to me. And I think that's really special. Even if I'm not the most personable person, I'm definitely very introverted, but I do feel like I can find connections with a lot of different types of people because I have this objective view of life.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say that I would add to that I think that Enneagram 5s add to this world that thirst for knowledge. I wonder, and I wish I had another, 100 years to live on this planet because there's a lot of things I would do, but more research into this would be one of them. I wonder if the Albert Einsteins of the world were Enneagram 5s, and the people that changed the world, the Thomas Edisons, not the Elizabeth Holmes who's going to jail for doing something she didn't create for real, but I wonder if the people that have this thirst and knowledge for research and for imparting knowledge to other people like that, you're world changers. And I hope you do become a teacher. I taught for 3 or 4 years of my career, and it was one of the best jobs I ever had. I loved imparting that knowledge on other people. But 5s showing up in the world as these people who, I like that you hold on to your spoons because one day I might need one, right? Yeah. And so while I want 5s out there to not hold on to all of your spoons, having some in your arsenal, to your point, Sophia, being able to relate to a multiple amount of people, going, you know what, I've been saving up for this. Crissy, you do that a lot. You do that a lot.
I do. I definitely do that. I reserve. I have reserves at all times. It's just I don't know any other way to be. Yeah.
So I think that Enneagram 5s are just beautiful, beautiful people. You are the rarest, I believe. And you really want all the information and all the things. But such growth in someone as young as you are, even in the structuring of this interview and how many times we had to reschedule. I'm thinking to myself, of all people to do this to, the 5 is not the one to do it to. But your maturity in this process has been nothing short of amazing. And I want you to know that. I want you to know that as we talk about on this podcast about the star of the story being Jesus is so evident in your life. And I wish that at your age, I was young enough to be as transparent as you are about panic attacks, I was also in a psych ward. I don't know if you know that, for 5 days, scariest 5 days of my whole life. And so I remember praying specifically for you when that whole thing happened, praying for your mom. And so I want you to know that you're just doing remarkable things. And so one question we are asking everyone, 2 questions, and these are Crissy's favorite questions about the last.
Yeah. How have the past 20 months been for you with the pandemic and everything? How has that as a 5 been?
Hard. There's no knowledge to have. Everything changes. Everything changes every day. And one thing, to a certain extent, it's 5. To a certain extent, it's anxiety. If something changes, I flip. Like, I cannot handle it.
So there with you.
Yeah. And so every day it's like, wear your mask, don't wear your mask, get vaccinated, don't give it. And so, not to make any statements one way or the other, but I just feel like just the changing information all the time. I'm like, there's nothing to hold on to. Like, I can't say, okay, this is the thing that is right. And this is the thing that people have been studying for. So I'm going to know everything I can about this thing. You just can't do it.
No, it's so true. It's so true.
So I just have a question for both of y'all. How are y'all navigating that?
One day at a time.
Yeah.
Yes. Strength for each moment, grace for each day kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What do you wish the world knew about 5s, and how can we live with our 5s better and help you guys thrive?
I thought for so long about this. I think I'm going to use the spoon analogy too, because it's just so good. Even though this is going to sound selfish to an extent, but hear me out. Okay. Even though I have all 10 of my spoons, sometimes 10 are not enough for a day for me. And so I feel like the twos of the world, my boyfriend's a 4. And so I feel like when there are people who, if they can see that my 10 are not, they're not holding me up, you know what I mean? Just being there, even when it seems like we've got it all together. And I guess that's kind of asking people to be mind readers in a sense, but it's so hard, especially as a 5, to say I need help, which is why I ended up in a psych ward. I waited for 3 months to say, this is too much. And just checking in, like genuinely being like, okay, my mom does this to me all the time. She's like, okay, you have 2 jobs, you go to school, you have therapy, you have a million different things. When are you taking time to read? When are you taking time to crochet? When are you taking time to do your things? And I feel like that's her extending, supporting me when my 10 spoons aren't enough, And the other thing that I thought of is also just kind of a cliche introverted thing. We love to be invited, but we also love to say no. You know what I mean? I was thinking about that, and I was like, what is one thing that I feel like I would, because it got to the point over the summer where my friends were like, Sophia always says no, she never wants to come. And I'm like, but I don't want you guys to hang out without me. Like, I want to be able to know what's going on. Because that's just a thing of knowing everything that's happening. If my friends are hanging out, I want to know. If they're not hanging out, I want to know that too.
That is so true. That is fantastic. We want to be invited, but we also want to say no. That is beautiful. Well, I will say this. As we near the end of the podcast, I hope you heard her. And I want to let that breathe. Check on your strong friends. And Enneagram 5s, especially Sophia Walsh, cancer survivor, is a strong friend. Ask them how they're doing. And when they lie to you, ask them again. When we see that their 10 spoons are not enough, let's not take one. And maybe let them borrow some of ours. I'm a 2, so you can have all of mine. And then I'll get some help. But I do want people to hear you out there, because 5s are also made in the image of God, as we see in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. But Sophia, as I didn't mean to do this. It started with the first podcast, and the Lord just kind of has been giving me a word for each Enneagram type. 2 verses came to mind for not only you, but for all of those out there, all Enneagram 5s who are like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. I just can't do it. And so I'm going to dial it back to 3 spoons and shut down and not interact in the world. I want you to remember 2 passages of scripture that came to my mind. One of them is Proverbs 18:10, where the Bible says, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. And so when that information and when life and trauma and loss comes at you and you feel this, as 5s do, this immense feeling of overwhelmness, more different than a 6, right? Different than a 6 who goes into go mode, different than a 2 who goes into 8 mode, which is also a go mode. 5s just feel incredibly overwhelmed when trauma and loss and life comes at them. Remember, I always think and I don't know, Sophia, if you've been to Disney World here in Orlando, but there's a water park, 2 of them there actually. And there's this little section where you're on your inner tubes in the lazy river, and it reminds me of Narnia. You're a reader, so I can go here with you. It reminds me of Narnia, and it's just this little cave, and I kind of hate caves. I hate tunnels. I hate all of them. But every time we go through there, I picture myself as crawling out of that inner tube and climbing onto the section that's there, and it's about a 6-foot section where you can hide under the cleft of that rock. And I remember this verse, he is my rock, he is my fortress, and I can kind of just be in this corner and remember this verse too. And this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, but especially for Enneagram 5s, 2 Corinthians 12:9, where the Bible says, but he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And Sophia, I hope you remember that. All Enneagram 5s out there, I hope you remember that. In some ways, I'm fairly jealous of people who have 5s in them. I think that might have been one of my lowest, simply because you can identify this overwhelmness, and you can go to the cleft of the rock. You can go to, you could get in between the paws of the true Aslan, as we see in C.S. Lewis, and again, back to Narnia. And so it is my prayer for you, Sophia, that as you move forward in your life, that you will continue to step into who God made you. I'm so proud of a young lady who has learned this much about how God made you using the framework of the Enneagram. I feel like I say it over and over, but for those of you listening, we know it's not the end all. But this gospel-centered approach of understanding who we are and how God made us and how we can process trauma is so huge. It is my wish and my prayer for you, young lady, that you get the desire back to sing, that your throat stops hurting when you sing, and that you can show up in this world in the way that you want to, whether it's at a high octave that I couldn't even begin to hit, or in the classroom, or in a podcast, or behind a keyboard. But you are a world changer, because you're the precious daughter of the Most High God. And I hope that you will always remember that. And so thank you for being here with us today. Chris, do you have anything else for Sophia?
No, but thank you so much for sharing with us. This has been a really, really, it's been helpful for me. So thank you.
I know we're learning a lot in these. I'm
right?
like, yeah, we're learning a lot. Well, Sophia, do you have anything else in parting words for our listeners?
I don't think so. Thank you guys for having me. I love the Enneagram, and I don't know like a lot of people that get as excited about it as I do. So I was so excited to talk about it.
Well, it has been our pleasure. I'm excited to talk about it. You can bet that I will be checking in on you. And so as we end the podcast, I always want to say the same thing that I always do. And I want to say it to you, Sophia, and I want to speak it over to you too, Crissy. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are valued. Thank you so much, Sophia. Well, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Sophia Walsh. It certainly was enlightening to me. There is something to be said for someone whose personality and the way God made them, really, they don't thrive usually when they are invaded upon or have an obligation put on them that they do not want. Certainly, Sophia did not ask for the fight of thyroid cancer, but she fought through it, and understanding the framework of how God made her even now helps her do that. And so I hope that you guys gained insight from that. Next up would be our Enneagram 6. That is in 2 weeks. If you want to listen to past episodes, just go into your podcast app and subscribe, and you will see there were other 4 episodes that we have done on the Enneagram, ranging from Becky Wade to I represent the helpers. Katie Ganchard, author Katie Ganchard, represents the achievers. Rachel Odom, type 4, and now Sophia Walsh. Next up in 2 weeks will be Crissy Lothridge for the Enneagram 6. And so I hope that you will like, share, subscribe, and don't forget that fundraiser that I talked about at the beginning of the episode. That link is also in the show notes. Until 2 weeks, you know what I'm going to say back here in the Healing Zone. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are valued. And in this Christmas season, may your life be marked by Him.